Former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo says Saturday's presidential election spells disaster for the troubled country unless opposition parties seek talks with the government. Gbagbo was speaking in Belgium, where he is awaiting the outcome of proceedings against him by the International Criminal Court. These are Gbagbo's first public comments since being ousted in 2011 as Ivorian president. He insists that dialogue between President Alassane Ouattara and the opposition will be key in averting a disaster. Gbagbo was forced out by forces loyal to Alassane Ouattara, who is seeking a third term in office. Anger at Ouattara's decision to run again has triggered deadly clashes and revived ethnic friction. Although he retains a powerful following in Ivory Coast, Gbagbo has been barred by the country's Constitutional Council from contesting the elections on legal grounds. Tensions are high in the country in the run-up to Saturday's vote following the decision by Ouattara to seek a third term. The Constitution only allows for 2 presidential terms. Michele Eken is a West Africa researcher. She joins us now. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Let's just first start with the comments being made by former President Gbagbo about how lack of dialogue between the opposition and Alassane Ouattara will lead to a disaster, as he calls it. What are your thoughts?
Good evening to you. Thank you for having me. We definitely think that there needs to be a dialogue between the party or Ouattara parties and opposition parties to ensure that the election tomorrow will be done in a safe environment. The recent clash recently seems to think that there's a very tension between people who oppose the third term of Ouattara and people who are against those protesters. So it's very important that there is an understanding between the different parties to ensure that the election tomorrow can be safely done.
What kind of understanding could there possibly? I mean, if you look at civil society, they've been very much underrepresented in public debate.
Yes, that's true. One concern Amnesty has is that people protesting and opposing the third mandate of Ouattara didn't really have room to protest. There's been a lot of ban on protests since August. That's been renewed in September until the 1st of November. We've seen protests done in August and September that's been brutally repressed. So it's really important that the freedom of peaceful assembly be respected and people who oppose Ouattara third mandate be able to express their opinion.
And as you say, it would be seen as a form of protest to project a voice on the elections that is contrary to the debate that's on the ground. So what does that mean? The opposition we've seen and have been for a long time now, very clearly against Ouattara running for a third term. He has tried to illegally change this. There was then a protest against it. So what real dialogue can actually exist between the dissenting parties?
Well, we'll leave it to them to decide how they can find a middle ground. What's important is that people who oppose it be able to express their thought, and people who actually want to vote tomorrow will be able to do it in a peaceful manner.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What we've seen in recent days have been fresh clashes in some towns in the Ivory Coast. I think even 16 people were reported to have died as a result, and some of the opposition calling on people not to go to the polls as a form of protest. What is your reaction to that?
Well, the clashes, I think you're referring to the clashes that happened in Dabu. I'm very sad because we saw a resurgence of inter-communal conflict that's very linked to political opposition, people having different political opinions. And what's important is that people who resort to violence, no matter the political affiliation, be held accountable for all the events that happen, and that the police intervene to prevent those violence from happening. And actually, like I said, make sure that everyone who resorted to acts of violence be held accountable for what they did. What we saw was a lot of violence in different villages of Dabu, and then reprisal later, few days later. And the police didn't intervene until way later, until a lot of people had been died, a lot of villages had been ransacked. And it's important that the authorities intervene sooner to make sure that the villagers are safe, and also to make sure that everyone who resort to violence are stopped and are held accountable for their acts.
So what do you foresee happening tomorrow? What are your predictions? There are some observers who are already predicting that the Ivory Coast election is and will fall off the rails. Obviously, this is not a situation on the African continent that we want, more conflict or lack of democratization. What do you foresee the situation playing out as?
Well, I think the election tomorrow, given the current environment, it's unfortunately being done in a tense environment. But I'm hoping all the parties, opposition parties, and the parties, Ouattara's party, can really ensure that the followers do it in a very peaceful manner. What happens tomorrow, it really depends on them and their followers, and we really hope that it could be done in a peaceful manner, and people who actually go to the polls can actually do it safely.
The Constitutional Council itself, what role do you foresee it played should there be contestation of the vote? It is, after all, the one that endorsed the incumbent to run for third term.
Yes, they did. Well, that all depends what happens tomorrow, and depending who will win the election, I guess the Constitutional Council will have a last say on whether the election were valid or not. And I can't really foresee what will happen. It all depends on what happens tomorrow in the polls.
And I just want to talk about a precedent being set here, because there are those who are saying the Constitution itself is ambiguous about term limits. What is your point of view as Amnesty International, and what action should then be taken?
Well, we don't really take any side. We don't really support any political parties. The interpretation of the new constitution is open to interpretation. And like I said, what's really important is that those who contest a certain reading of the Constitution be able to do so without any repression. I'm
not necessarily asking you to take a side as Amnesty, but it will. It does have the potential to set even a precedent regionally. Some say if you look at the Comores, some say if you look at Uganda, that people may then take advantage of this. So what I'm talking about is for you to talk about ambiguity of constitutional or presidential terms in constitutions. Is that something that should happen? What action should be taken to prevent that?
Well, I think the terms that are used in the Constitution should be as clear as possible to avoid the type of situation Ivory Coast find themselves now. Phrase it in a way that it's clear that a president cannot run more than a certain term in this lifetime, and also we should also take in consideration the intention behind the new constitution, so that this type of situation would not happen. I think the people who draft the constitution, parliamentary, needs to be as clear as possible to avoid this type of situation Ivory Coast is in now.
All right, thank you very much for speaking to us, taking the time there, researcher, West Africa researcher Michele Eken. To Tanzania, where